Hi everyone, and welcome to today's session on what's new in SAP HANA Cloud. In this session, the SAP HANA Cloud Product Management team will introduce and demonstrate the most recent innovations in SAP HANA Cloud, including SAP HANA Cloud's overall infrastructure and services, multi-model data processing, replication service support for calculation view replication, and enhancements to the SAP HANA Cloud Data Lake. I'd like to pass this webinar over to you, Thomas.
Thank you, Michelle, and also a warm welcome from my end. I'm super happy to give you all an update on the latest innovations that have been introduced for SAP HANA Cloud again, now at the beginning of 2022. And today we, as usually, we only want to focus on a few of the highlights of the latest release. So definitely let me add that what you're seeing today isn't just it. So there is definitely way more innovations and adjustments and new functionalities being added to SAP HANA Cloud and all of the surrounding tools. But we just highlighted, or we're just going to highlight a few of the great aspects from our perspective that you definitely should know about. But today it's not just me. As usual, I have a bunch of product experts with me that will guide us through all of the innovations in these specific areas related to SAP HANA Cloud. So we will kick it off, as Michelle already said today, with a tour through all of the highlights related to the SAP HANA database as part of SAP HANA Cloud. So first of all, Rüdiger will give us some insights into the smart multi-model capabilities, followed by Tisuk giving us an update on the so-called hybrid scenario and all the replication tooling that supports that. And after that, we will have a specific tour on the latest innovations in the data lake as well. So Daniel will give us some insights here as well. And then, of course, I will wrap it up in the end with a few more innovations and news that you definitely should know about. And with that, I definitely would like to jump into the very first topic, which is our innovations in the area of smart multi-model data processing. And for that, I would love to hand it over to you, Rüdiger.
Thanks, Thomas. Hello, everyone, and welcome also from my end. And I will talk about a bit about the innovations in multimodal data processing with SAP HANA Cloud. So next slide, Thomas. Okay, there are a couple of new functions we have introduced for spatial processing. So we introduced a so-called grid generator. The grid generator is a set of spatial functions where you can create a custom grid consisting of square and rectangle cells to cover a geometry. So it could be a kind of map that you can cover with a custom grid, and it helps you to identify objects or an address, and you can refer to it, and you can, like for example here, you can count objects that pass the grid cell. So it's not a clustering that we have already in place. It's just that you lay a grid on top of a geometry first, and then you refer to objects that are passing through the grid and where you can identify measurement points as an example. And you see here also what is the SQL statement behind. Just to explain a bit, you have a geometry, a bounding box. It's just one point, and you want to cover this one point with a square grid with a cell length of 1. And what you get back is a polygon that is exactly covering this bounding box, this geometry, this single point. And you can imagine if you have a larger bounding box, and you have a small grid cell length, you get a grid that you see on the right side for a lake that we have here on a map. Next slide, please, Thomas. Okay, next spatial function is that you can calculate the closest distance between two trajectories. A trajectory is a line string, actually, that consists of coordinates and an m value. That's a measurement, for example, time. And you see here on this picture, as an example, you have routes from two ships. And for every time you have a measurement value, like whatever distance, whatever. And what you can do now is you can calculate the closest distance between these two ship routes on specific m value. For a specific m value here, the closest distance is for the m value 14.20 something. It could be referencing to a time or something else. And this is what the spatial function closest point of approach is doing. And you see also here an example for the SQL statement. And if you look closer to the SQL statement, you see that there's a colored number here for the line string geometry. And these are the m values. They are increasing values. And this is important. This is a prerequisite. And now we come to the next function. And yeah, actually, this is about how you can deal with the Esri-JSON format in HANA Cloud. We introduced this already with QRC3, but actually we didn't. I didn't present this here in the kind of rollout session, so I included this feature as well. The Esri-JSON format is very well known for Esri developers. So they have an ArcGIS client or server and want to use Esri-JSON encoded data and to exchange with the HANA Cloud database. And we introduced two new functions to return an Esri representation of a geometry and to construct a geometry from an Esri-JSON geometry object. And the corresponding SQL statements are also here in this slide below, where you can construct a geometry or where you can create an Esri-JSON representation. Next slide, Thomas. Okay, this is the support of so-called SRID-NULL columns. What does it mean? I think when you create a table with a spatial column, in former releases of HANA Cloud, you had to assign an SRID value for spatial reference system. And with this new feature, this constraint is not required anymore. So you can create a table with a spatial attribute that has not a constraint of a specific spatial reference system from the beginning, from the definition of the table. So you can leave it flexible and can insert geometries at a later point in time with any SRID values you can use. It's very flexible then to insert values and to work with this table. There are some drawbacks for this kind of tables for optimizations, because we need to handle different SRID values. So the optimization is not working in the same way as you have the same SRID value for all geometries in this table. So this is what you need to keep in mind, and also you need to be careful with the values in this table, because all the geometries may have different spatial reference system IDs. Okay, next slide, Thomas. Next one is the real-time graph. Before QRC4, before the current release of HANA Cloud, we had a challenge that a graph workspace had to be recreated every time when you change the values in this graph workspace for vertices and edges. And so for larger graphs with millions of edges, we had to rebuild the graph once a value is changed. And you can imagine, so like 1 second per 1 million edges. And that is not really real time. And we solved that with QRC4, where any change that you made in your edge tables or vertices tables for our graph workspace is updated in real time. So the workspace has not to be recreated, and there is no delay in using the graph workspace when you change values. And this helps extremely to work with HANA graph capabilities in a real-time environment. Next, Thomas. Now we come to the document store. We introduced some new features and capabilities over the year of 2021. And just as a recap, what is the document store in the HANA Cloud instance? Actually, it's another process that you have in HANA Cloud, in the HANA Cloud instance. It's tightly connected to the index server and runs in the same transactional domain. So every modification you do is tightly connected to the index server, same transactional domain, sharing the same persistence. You have the same administration tooling. So it's absolutely transparent for you and the application how the document store runs under the hood in the SAP HANA Cloud instance. So you don't need to care about asset compliance, about all the capabilities we have for compression, for SQL integration, whatsoever. So just as a recap, and now we come to an enhancement in QRC4 in the next slide. Okay, what you can do now is you can enable the document store in a HANA Cloud instance, not only when you create the HANA Cloud instance, but also while you are using the HANA Cloud instance. So you can enable it. You see here a screenshot with the additional features where you can enable the script server, but also the document store while the HANA Cloud instance is running on. But you need to keep in mind that disabling the document store needs a service request. So self-service here is still not in plan. This is something we will do in 2022. And also an offering of the document store in the HANA Cloud free tier environment is planned in 2022 as well. Please also keep in mind that for the document store, you need an increased resource. So you need at least 3 virtual CPUs in your HANA Cloud instance. You start usually with 2 virtual CPUs, but you need 3 at least to run the document store in the HANA Cloud instance. If you would like to check the existence of a document store in the HANA Cloud instance, for example, you are not the administrator, you are just an end user, but you would like to know, is the document store enabled? There's a SQL statement you can use to see if this feature is enabled in the HANA Cloud instance. Next slide, Thomas. Yeah, and what we did over the year in 2021, we were focusing on arrays. Array support in JSON documents is very common. On the left side here, you see a sample collection. It's named measurements, and you see that you have 2 arrays. One is for the temperature, where you have multiple values at different times, and you have also different dates. And what you can do is you can unnest these arrays in to have a list of rows that you can further process if you would like to combine, to join with data in your relational store in the HANA Cloud database. Or you want to also compare strings in the JSON document. We introduced the like statement that you know from standard SQL. And we also introduced, and for any enhancement in the where clause, just to check in the JSON document if there is any value here for temperature that's below 7. And you see here that that's the sensor ABCD that has a temperature value below 7. All the other sensor EFGH has higher values, so you can just do a simple check for specific values in your areas in the JSON document. And we will keep to continuously improve these and capabilities in the JSON document store. Next, please, Thomas. And I think that's it from my end, and hand over back to you, Thomas.
Thanks a lot, Rüdiger. Thanks for that tour through the innovations that we have introduced to the smart multimodal capabilities in SAP HANA Cloud. Next on the list, as you can already see on the slide, is our update on the innovations related to the hybrid scenario in SAP HANA Cloud, specifically about the innovations that we have introduced to the replication service. But before I hand over to Tae-Suk, who will give us some more insights, I'll definitely want to take the time and give a quick note that still our product experts, of course, are on board in the background to answer all your questions. So take the time, if any question comes up on your end, to raise them via the Q&A tool, and we'll come back to your questions in written form. And now, Tae-Suk, I would give it over to you to give us an update on the hybrid scenario.
Thank you, Thomas. Hi, my name is Tae-Suk Son, and I'm the topic owner for the hybrid scenario. And with the initial release of the SAP HANA Cloud, we tried to make our customers easy to extend their on-prem system to the SAP HANA Cloud. So when we first released it, we tried to support the table replication from the on-prem to the SAP HANA Cloud. Next slide, please. So we are aware that a lot of on-prem application, especially SAP customers, are running on top of the HANA platform and have some OLTP applications as the system of record that are kept safe inside their corporate firewalls, but they would also like to extend their workload into the cloud. So like I've mentioned, we've supporting the tables, but we would like to extend their analytical workload into the cloud. And we are aware that the analytical workloads are consisted of, next click, please. So if you wanted to connect the analytical workload to the cloud, customers would use the SAP Analytics Cloud to connect directly to the on-prem system, but this will have some latency because you are going through the corporate firewall in a remote site. So instead of trying to connect remotely, a lot of customers have tried to migrate their analytical workload into the cloud, which meant that they had to migrate some of their calculation views, tables, and reference data that consists of these analytical workload into SAP HANA Cloud. But it was a lot of effort to migrate them as the technology basis was somewhat different between the on-prem and the HANA Cloud. So with this release, what we tried to do is make it very easy and simple to replicate these analytical workloads directly into the SAP HANA Cloud with a few simple clicks, which improved latency because we've actually moved over the analytical workload into the cloud, and also all the transactional data that are happening on-prem are replicated in real time. And this can be serviced to multiple regions because you can just initiate or deploy a new SAP HANA Cloud to multiple regions. And each of these analytical workloads can be serviced regionally if needed. And finally, because they can be spun up anytime that is needed, that it is elastically scaled based on the demand of the workload, and also shut down if there's no further use for it. So to go into the more details, we'll look at how we are doing it internally. So on the left side, you can see the on-prem system with the SAP HANA Cloud and the applications running on top, and on the right side with the cloud. And we've started by replicating the table from on-prem to the HANA Cloud using real-time replication. And also, we started supporting the SQL views. And with the QRC04, we now support replicating the calculation views from on-prem system directly to the SAP HANA Cloud. What we are actually doing is we're extracting the calculation view metadata from on-prem, sorry. We're extracting the metadata from the on-prem system and parsing the information and retrieving the details of the object, and retrieve all the related information and recreates them into the HANA Cloud. So this is our initial release as part of the QRC04, but we will expand it to support the analytic privileges in the coming quarter. So based on that, let me show the demo. So here, I'm connected to the on-prem HANA system where the calculation views are repository-based, and it's using an OLAP cube type of calculation view. And as you can see, there is the dimensional calculation view that exists inside the replication repository, and it consists of dimension or calculation views and also the OLAP table. And also the amounts are based on multiple different local currencies. So we are trying to make a conversion from these local currencies to euros. So internally, it is using some currency conversion data as part of the calculation view computation. So it requires some reference data internally as part of the calculation view. So to replicate this, what we're trying to do is that, and as you can see here, we're connecting from the SAC to the on-prem system, and it took about half a second to, in terms of the average response time. And now we're connected to the cockpit in SAP HANA Cloud. And within the monitoring section, we have the replication service to actually try to replicate this calculation view from the on-prem. So we can create a new replication. And with the SPS05, we support the remote table replication, which is the real-time replication that is supported for SPS05. And we connect to the system directly. And then we select the schema and create the schema into the SAP HANA Cloud by putting the initial password. And then we can select table, SQL view, or calculation view that we want to replicate from the on-prem. And we will select the reference data that is needed for unit conversion or currency conversion. And we'll set it as real-time replication. So whenever there are changes from the on-prem side, that all these data are replicated in real time. And then finally, we will select the calculation view, the sales order that we have shown previously. and it will do the parsing and check all the dependent objects and retrieve all the metadata related to the dependent objects. And then it will regenerate these objects from the on-prem system into the SAP HANA Cloud. So it's actually recreated the objects, and then once the objects have been created, all the underlying table data will be replicated in real time. Okay. So while the table is being loaded in the background, we can check the dependent objects of the calculation view, the sales order calculation view. And you can see here that it's showing all the dimensional calculation view, all the hierarchies, and all the tables that are needed for this one specific sales order calculation view. And now we'll go to the SAC again and connect to the SAP HANA Cloud and select the replicated calculation view. So this is the calculation view that had been just replicated. So it's created new in the SAP HANA Cloud, and it retrieves all the measures and also all the dimension data that was defined as part of the calculation view in the on-prem system. And now we'll create a canvas using that calculation view. And simply we'll try to create a chart, select some measure like gross amount, and then dimension. And as you can see, the computation will be refreshed very fast as all the data are now local in SAP HANA Cloud. And based on that, we can create a dashboard using that one calculation view for various measures. And we select any filters, and the data will be refreshed very fast. And as we go back to the statistics of SAC, the on-prem was half a second, but for the hybrid connection, we have reduced the average query time down to about half. So that's it for my demo. Like I mentioned, that this is something that we've released for QRC04, and we'll gradually support the analytical privilege and some of the user and roles related to the analytical privilege so that we can support more sophisticated calculation views in the coming quarter. Okay, that's it for my demo, and back to you, Thomas.
Thanks a lot, Tisuk. That was definitely great, and I'm happy to see that we now can support even more replication scenarios, specifically looking also at the analytical workloads that we can offload from on-premises systems to HANA Cloud. In the meantime, Tisuk, it would definitely be great if you can support also on questions, because I can see that our audience already sent in some great questions. So definitely appreciate your support here. Okay, next topic, we can already see it on the slide, is about the innovations in our data lake. And for that, I'm happy to hand it over to Daniel, our expert in that topic, who will give us some updates about the innovations that we have introduced for the data lake in December 2021. Daniel, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Thomas, and thank you, Taesuk, for taking us through your presentation. I will be talking about the HANA Cloud Data Lake today, and we have a few innovations for you guys. So the first innovation, we have automatic refresh with materialized views. Materialized views can now be created with an automatic refresh parameter. So this enables us to set up this. It enables us an auto refresh manager, which will periodically update the view when any of its base tables, the tables that the view is defined on, have a transaction commit. So previously we had to manually update our materialized views, but now we don't need to worry about that. We can use options to define the maximum staleness thresholds, which will only allow queries to view will only allow queries on the view to return results if the view has been refreshed within a certain maximum time allotted. And we can now query our materialized views, not worrying about staleness, and being confident that we're seeing the most recent version of the data we are exploring. And I'll show you more about this in the upcoming demo. The next innovation we have is the ability to load multiple parquet files in a single load table statement. So when you have two files, they might have they might belong in the same table, but have difference in column names or column order. And this would require us to run two separate load table statements, but now we can reduce this manual effort and load multiple files at once. So we can declare the mappings for each file schema to the table schema and load them all in one execution. And I'll demonstrate this later in a demo as well. Next slide. We have some additions to the command line interface for the data lake file store. So we've added some commands. One of them is the download command for copying files from the data lake file container to a local computer. Another is the list recursively, or LSR command. This is going to allow us to explore the hierarchy of the files in our file container, which we can see in the image here. And we've also added the delete or remove command. So this is self-explanatory. We're deleting and removing files from the file container with these commands. And we have a series of minor additions as well. So one is the manage event system privilege, which allows users to modify and alter their own events. Previously, there was only the manage any prevent privilege. So now we have the ability to grant access to the event owner without giving them access to all events with the manage event privilege. We also have a new statement that allows a user connection to be made to the connection that is made to the IQ database to be dropped. This is aptly named the drop connection parameter or statement, and this requires just using a IQ store procedure to look at the connections and applying a connection ID to drop the connection. We have added a new store procedure for viewing files or viewing the files that are tracked by a remote table or exist in a path referenced by a data source defined on a remote table. And this is the SP remote data source files. Store procedure, this is mainly used for SQL files or virtual tables that are pointing at files. And we've added the JOT token authentication. So we can create database users that instead of using a password, use a JOT token login policy. And all that is managed within the IQ database by creating a provider within IQ, mapping that user with a provider, and then creating a certificate for validation that a user can use to connect to the IQ database. And just a few other additions, we have the restore deleted or overwritten files with the restore snapshot API for the data lake file container. Snapshots of your file container are created every time a file is deleted or overwritten, so you can feel safe whenever you're doing operations that involve overwriting or deleting files in your file container, since we can use the restore snapshot API endpoint to restore them. And there is now a Apache Spark driver or a data lake files driver for Apache Spark that plugs into your Hadoop file system, and you can now access your data lake files through Apache Spark. And we've provided a quick start tutorial for getting ready and using the Data Lake IQ Data Lake files and SQL on files container. So those are our innovations, and I just want to show a few of those to you guys today. And we will start with the auto refresh and materialized views. So I've gone ahead and I've already created two materialized views, one with the auto refresh option and one with the manual full refresh option. As you can see, the syntax for creating the materialized view is largely the same, just with the addition of the option auto full refresh or manual full refresh. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select from both these materialized views just to show that we get the same data back. So we can see both results are the same. And all we're doing here is we're just selecting from our materialized view normally with the option of our materialized view staleness limit fresh. So what this means is that we don't want to return any data unless it is up to date with the most recent changes of its base table. And we're doing the same in the manually refreshed materialized view, we're just adding a parameter here, materialized view staleness check equals 2. And what this does is it allows us to specify that we want the manually refreshed materialized views to be checked as well. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to insert and commit these changes to the base tables of the materialized views. And if I try to select from the auto refresh one, we'll get a message saying another user has the row line order join locked, and that's because in the background the materialized view is trying to update. And if we try to select from the manual refresh materialized view, we'll get an error saying the materialized view manual line order join exceeds the user specified staleness criteria and must be refreshed. And this is just indicating to us that it does not meet our freshness criteria. However, if we wanted to still select from the dated materialized view, we can use a parameter, or we can set our staleness limit to something like 10 minutes. And we'll see that we get the old data back. So if I go ahead and I refresh the manually refreshed materialized view, and we hit select, we will see that we get an updated view with a much larger value. And we can see that without having to refresh the automatic or the auto refresh view, we also get that same result back. And that is the auto refresh materialized views. The next thing I want to show is loading multiple parquet files in a single load table statement. So I'm just going to go a quick example of trying to load two different parquet files while their columns are not aligned, or they have different column names within the files. And we'll see here as this statement tries to run, it's going to come back with an error letting us know that it couldn't find one of the columns in the files, or in one of the files. And we see here, so load with format parquet hit error, could not find column name cust key in the file customer2. So to get around this with our new feature of loading multiple parquet files in one load table statement, we can essentially concatenate two different load table statements into one and specify the mapping between table columns and file columns. So with our first customer file, customer_1.parquet, we're going to grab the columns cust key, cname, all the table name columns. And for our second file, we're actually going to map the table names columns to that of the columns of the file. So we can see here C_cust key is going to be grabbed from the column named C1, and similarly for the rest of the columns. So we'll run this and we will see that it succeeds. And here we are, it succeeded. And that is how we would get around loading multiple parquet files into a single IQ table with differing column names or differing column orders. And the last thing I want to show you is just how we can drop connections now. So using a IQ procedure called the SP_IQ connection, we can get a table back that shows us all of the connections being made to our Data Lake IQ database. So if I were to open up a new SQL console under a new user and then run this procedure again, we can see that there is a new connection under the user ID Daniel_test with the connection handle of 53855. And if I wanted to drop this connection because it's suspicious or I don't want it anymore, we can just go right ahead and type in the connection handle, run drop connection. Oops. Connection was not found because we just dropped it. And now if I try to use this SQL console we will find that it will not work. Cannot select because connection was terminated. All right, thank you guys so much. This has been my demo and my presentation, and I will pass it on.
All right, thanks, Daniel. Now, basically concluding the number of innovations that we want to share with you, I definitely want to highlight a few more additional things and want to give you a few more updates related to HANA Cloud. So let me briefly share my screen. Apart from the highlights that our colleagues shared today, we have also introduced other innovations, and also, of course, as usual, we have been working on also extending our data center landscape. So therefore, let's take a quick look, first of all, at our data center locations that we're supporting with SAP HANA Cloud. And as you can see here on the picture, we meanwhile have a fairly diverse data center landscape that is available across the entire globe. In the last What's New webinar for SAP HANA Cloud, we also announced that HANA Cloud is now available on Google Cloud Platform as well. And as of January 2022, we will then also have HANA Cloud available on the Google Cloud Platform in Europe. So this is one of the additions that we will see becoming available for HANA Cloud on GCP. And in next year, then we will also provide the support for HANA Cloud on the Google Cloud Platform in APJ data centers as well. So also in Asia, we will then have an offering on Google Cloud Platform. Quite related to that, we have introduced the so-called free tier offering for SAP HANA Cloud, which is basically a BTP offering. So it's not just only spanning across HANA Cloud. It also is available for multiple other services in the BTP environment. And we're happy that since TechEd this year, we're also able to provide SAP HANA Cloud as one part of that offering. Means that you can now consume HANA Cloud for free at the same time with other services that are part of the BTP offering. And the great thing about the free tier is that you can start working with the services for free and then move on using paid service plans as well. So transitioning from a free model into a paid model, depending on your demands. And that definitely gives great flexibility and also helps you to some degree safeguard the investments that you have been doing on the free plans as well, while investigating the service, while kickstarting some of the developments in the free environment. Comparing that to trial, there is really the main difference that there is no expiry date for the free tier environment. Compared to trial, there was an expiry date after 1 year. And as said, the possibility to seamlessly upgrade from the free plan to the paid plan is definitely also a major difference. And apart from that, last bullet, and you can also see here on the slide, one of the great benefits is that the free tier model is available in many more data centers and landscapes compared to the trial environment. That will be definitely interesting for users that aren't just interested in data centers in the US or in Europe. So that's all about the free tier model for SAP HANA Cloud. If you want to get started with the service with the free tier model, if you want to experience that with SAP HANA Cloud, you can take a look at our tutorials that we have for the free tier model, especially related to HANA Cloud, how you get started with that. Just by hitting our box here on the right, you will find the link to the tutorials, but we also have it in our reference slide that we will definitely share with you. Next, I want to talk about is some innovations that we have introduced for the connectivity from SAP HANA Cloud to SAP Analysis for Office. As some of you may definitely know, Analysis for Office is one of the very well-known tools for performing analysis on business data in a very convenient way. and it's used by many of our customers, and therefore also a direct connection to SAP HANA Cloud was always demanded. But the setup in the past was a bit cumbersome, and now we have eased the setup of the integration via the SAP Business Application Studio and a tutorial-based wizard that you can now find in there that guides you through the necessary steps of setting up the connection. The connection between SAP Analysis for Office and SAP HANA Cloud works via the SAP HANA Analytics adapter that you need to deploy using the Business Application Studio. And that entire process has now been wrapped into that tutorial-based guidance that we now offer with the SAP Business Application Studio. To explain that, the SAP Academy team created some great materials about the integration in detail, but also about SAP HANA Cloud in the context of the SAP Analysis for Office tool in addition. So here you can find a great playlist of like videos that guide you through the value of the both tools in combination, and also give some great insights specifically into the new integration. So I definitely can recommend taking a look at that, and I'm happy to see that we now can offer an improved integration here. Next, what I want to talk about is also related to the SAP Business Application Studio. As all of you may know, the SAP Business Application Studio is the recommended development environment for SAP HANA Cloud. And therefore, we also always try to integrate into the guidance and the tutorials and the user experience that the Business Application Studio is providing. And one of these key concepts is what we call guided developments. And guided developments are also, let's say, tutorials or wizards that should help developers to perform frequently executed development tasks in an easier manner, or help them to get started with some of the very common tasks that we are seeing. And therefore, we have also integrated into that framework with SAP HANA Cloud already earlier, and are over time extending the list of guided developments that we've provided to our customers. The way you can experience that yourself is simply by jumping into the Business Application Studio, and then you can, with the push of the F1 button, open up the menu bar where you can simply then navigate to the guided development, which is called SAP HANA Getting Started. And in there, you can then find all of the guided developments that we're providing. And these guided developments span over things like how to create native database artifact projects, how to perform calculation view modeling, how to create certain database artifacts that you want to deploy, how to develop database applications. These sort of things are then being covered in the guided developments, and therefore we hope that we can provide a better guidance for our customers for these use cases. And then the last innovation that is also related to the Business Application Studio and will also, from our perspective, definitely ease working with the product is related to the SQL console. So now in Business Application Studio, you have on the left-hand side what we call a database list. And here you basically see all the database connections that we were able to connect to from the Business Application Studio using, of course, the configuration of your Cloud Foundry environment that you need to specify in Business Application Studio. And then in there, we basically query all the database systems that are accessible. And for all the accessible database systems, all the HANA Cloud database systems to be specific, we can then allow you to create a connection and then also run SQL queries right in the SAP Business Application Studio. And that provides a great value that you do not need to use multiple tools for development and for validating queries, for executing queries, either, for instance, to change some settings or some artifacts in the database. We rather now have really an integrated experience here also from that perspective. The plugin right now, or the view and the SQL console, is available as of today also in the Business Application Studio, and we will also provide a plugin later on for Microsoft Visual Studio Code. As some of you know, these tools are very closely related with each other. So therefore, you will also find a plugin or an extension that you can enable in the Visual Studio Code on your local PC. Next, what I want to highlight is an addition in the area of, let's say, availability checks or monitoring and service administration. During the last webinar that we were hosting in the last quarter, we already shared some insights into the new metrics and alert APIs that we are offering for SAP HANA Cloud to ease operations on your side with SAP HANA Cloud, to give you the possibility to gather more insights from the service and from the status of the service. And now we are having introduced 2 new metrics to our metrics API. These are meant to provide more insights into the availability and the accessibility of the service, to be more specific. And to provide that, we have integrated 2 more metrics that are on the one hand side, or one of these is for the HANA database and the other one for the data lake, being called HDB accessible or HDL accessible. And you can see here on the right-hand side of the screen how the metrics are defined with the first call, and the second call shows how the metric is being used to then derive value, the values you're interested in from the service. The great thing, just to briefly recap about the metrics API, is that it's independent of the statistics server in the database systems. So it also provides responses in case the system is no longer up and running, for instance, simply because the users turned the system off or because of any issues that unfortunately happened. And this gives you the great possibility to really also answer certain questions that come up with the operations and management of the service, not just during the time when the service is up and running. If you want to find out more about the REST APIs that we're providing with HANA Cloud, I definitely recommend checking out the tutorial that is listed here on the slide. We will share that also after the webinar via the resource view, but it's also being mentioned here. It gives you more guidance on how to use the APIs and what of more details on the capabilities that we're providing with it. And last but not least, I also want to give a glimpse into additions and changes that we have introduced with our administration tooling, especially looking now at the SAP HANA Database Explorer and the SAP HANA Cockpit. So I don't want to call out all of these in too much detail, but as you can see, that matches also to the innovations that we have been discussing earlier. For instance, we have also integrated the Esri import shapefile functionalities into the tooling, supporting all of the cloud hyperscalers that where SAP HANA Cloud is now also available. Talking about Amazon S3, Azure Storage, Alibaba Cloud OSS, and the Google Cloud Storage as well. We've been also integrating, of course, the Google Cloud Storage system into all of the import and export data dialogues and wizards for the HANA database and the data lake. So now, of course, that's all feature complete and fully usable for you if you commit to go with Google Cloud. What I definitely want to point out is that we have invested in the support for virtualized parameterized SQL views or user-defined functions with SAP HANA Cloud. So you can now virtually connect to these sort of views or these functions via our Smart Data Access Framework in SAP HANA Cloud. And that's, from my perspective, an absolutely great addition and definitely a functionality that will be frequently used by our customers. So more than worth highlighting. Same as, of course, with our hierarchical workload classes that now can be also conveniently managed in our administration tools, being more specific in the cockpit. And then, of course, adding to that, we have the HANA Deployment Infrastructure Administration application or page existing now in the cockpit. We gave some more insights into the tool already in the last webinar, but it was released with a little bit of a delay. Therefore, we now have it here on the slide. Once again, repeating that it's available for you and it can be used in the cockpit now for administrating the HANA deployment infrastructure artifacts. And last but not least, it's related to the JWT token providers and the provider configuration store that we have in the cockpit, which now also gives the possibility for storing these JWT providers with public keys. And that's it from our end, actually, for today, giving you some insights into some of the innovations that we have released with SAP HANA Cloud and the latest release in 2021. As said in the beginning, this isn't just it. So as part of the release, we have introduced way more functionalities, adjustments, and improvements. So if you're curious about that, either take a look at the What's New document that we have in our help portal, or check out our product update blog, where we also link to all of the relevant assets. And with that, I want to thank everyone for joining this webinar. I'm super happy that we were able to once again provide a great number of innovations. Thanks to all the presenters for being here and touring us through the innovations.